It is a freezing December night in 1811. In Boston, church bells suddenly begin to ring. No one is pulling the ropes. In Washington, President Madison feels his house sway beneath him. In Charleston, chimneys crack and plaster rains from ceilings. And the source of all of it, the force shaking the entire eastern half of America, is not anywhere near those cities. It is more than 1,000 miles away, under a small farming town in Missouri, on a fault line most Americans have never heard of. And here is what should keep you watching. Many scientists studying American earthquakes will tell you, quietly, that this fault worries them more than California. That sounds impossible. California is earthquake country. San Andreas is the famous monster. So let me give you the 3 reasons, right now, and then we will walk through each one, because once you understand them, you will never think about the middle of America the same way again. Reason 1. When this fault ruptures, the shaking does not stay local. The ancient rock of the Midwest carries earthquake energy 10 to 20 times farther than the ground in California ever could. A major quake in Los Angeles is a California disaster. A major quake here is a disaster for half the country at once. Reason 2. California spent a century preparing. Strict building codes, reinforced hospitals, retrofitted bridges. The Midwest, for most of its history, built as if earthquakes did not exist. Brick buildings, unreinforced masonry, river bridges and pipelines designed for floods and tornadoes, not for the ground itself turning to liquid. Reason 3. This fault does not sit under empty farmland. It sits under the arteries of America, the Mississippi River crossings, the interstate highways, the rail lines, the pipelines carrying natural gas from the Gulf to the cities of the north and east. The exact corridor where the nation's supply chains squeeze together is the exact place where the ground once tore itself apart. That is the promise of this video. By the end, you will know what happened here 2 centuries ago, what scientists have discovered underneath this region, and what the models say happens if it wakes up again over the cities we have built on top of it. This is the New Madrid seismic zone, and its story begins with the most powerful sequence of earthquakes in the recorded history of the eastern United States. December 16th, 1811. Around 2 in the morning, the ground beneath the Mississippi River Valley rips apart. People in the town of New Madrid, Missouri, are thrown from their beds in the dark. Cabins collapse. The earth itself begins to move in visible waves, rolling across the land like swells on the ocean. Witnesses describe cracks opening in the ground, some of them venting sand and water high into the air, whole geysers of mud erupting from farm fields. The air fills with the smell of sulfur, and the river, the Mississippi, the great highway of early America, goes insane. Banks collapse into the water, whole islands disappear. Boatmen watch the water churn and boil around them in the darkness. And that was only the first one, because New Madrid did not produce one great earthquake. It produced 3. Over 2 months, each one estimated in the range of magnitude 7 to 8, with some estimates for the largest running even higher. January 23rd, 1812, the second great shock. And then, February 7th, 1812, the one witnesses called the hard shock. That final quake destroyed what was left of the town of New Madrid entirely. It was this rupture, scientists believe, that performed the most famous act in American geological history. It lifted the bed of the Mississippi River itself, and for a period of hours, the mightiest river on the continent ran backwards. Let that image settle. The Mississippi River, flowing north. Waterfalls forming on a river that had never had them. Boats dragged upstream by a current running the wrong direction. In northwest Tennessee, the ground dropped and the river poured into the new depression, creating a lake that had not existed the day before. Reelfoot Lake. It is still there today. You can fish on it. It is a state park, with cypress trees standing in the water, growing out of what used to be dry forest floor. The scar of the earthquake became a permanent piece of American geography, and the land did not settle quietly between the great shocks. For those entire 2 months, the ground almost never stopped moving. Witnesses kept journals, and the journals read like accounts from another planet. Hundreds upon hundreds of aftershocks, some of them serious earthquakes in their own right, day after day, week after week. One resident of Louisville counted nearly 2,000 separate tremors over the winter. People in the region simply stopped sleeping indoors through a Missouri winter because they no longer trusted their own roofs. They built shelters in open fields and lived there, in the cold, waiting for the earth to finish. Some accounts describe strange flashes of light along the ground during the shocks, and skies darkened by dust thrown up from the shattered land. To the settlers of the valley, with no science to explain any of it, it seemed like the end of the world. Entire river towns were abandoned, and across the frontier, the winter of the earthquakes entered folklore, a season when the most solid thing in anyone's life, the ground itself, stopped being solid. The shaking from these quakes was felt across an area of roughly 1 million square miles. People felt it in Canada, they felt it in New Orleans, they felt it on the Atlantic coast. To put that in perspective, the Great San Francisco earthquake of 1906, the most famous quake in American history, was strongly felt across an area many times smaller. Same continent, same planet, completely different behavior. And the reason for that difference is reason one, the secret of the rock itself. Here is the geology in plain language. California sits on a plate boundary, a zone where two great slabs of the Earth's crust grind past each other. All that grinding has left the rock out west hot, young, and shattered, broken by thousands of faults. When an earthquake releases energy there, that broken, warm rock absorbs it, the way a crumpled blanket muffles a sound. The shaking is violent, but it dies out relatively fast as it travels. The middle of the continent is the opposite. The crust under the Midwest is ancient, cold, dense, and intact. It is some of the oldest, hardest rock on the continent, and it transmits seismic energy the way a steel rail transmits the sound of a distant train. Energy that would fade within 100 miles in California rings across 1,000 miles in the central United States. That is not speculation. That is why church bells rang in Boston. The continent itself is a bell, and New Madrid sits at the striking point, which raises the question that has puzzled scientists for generations. What is a massive earthquake zone even doing there? New Madrid is nowhere near a plate boundary. It sits in the middle of the North American plate, territory that should, by the simple textbook rules, be seismically dead. The leading answer lies buried deep below the river valley. Around 500 million years ago, the continent began to tear apart right there, a rift, like the great rift valleys of Africa today. The tearing stopped, the continent stayed whole, but the wound remained, a buried zone of broken, weakened rock, hidden under thousands of feet of river sediment. Scientists call it the Reelfoot Rift. You cannot see it, you cannot hike to it. There is no dramatic cliff, no smoking crater, no visible line across the land. Farmers plant soybeans directly above it. Trucks cross it on the interstate every few seconds without a sign to mark it. The most dangerous geological structure in the eastern half of America announces itself with absolutely nothing. It is an ancient scar in the basement of the continent, and when the slow stresses of the plate build up, that old scar is where the rock gives way. And it is still giving way. This is the part most people living on top of it do not know. The New Madrid seismic zone is one of the most active earthquake regions east of the Rockies. Right now, today, instruments in the region record roughly 200 small earthquakes every year, most too small to feel, a constant crackling in the deep rock. Since monitoring began in earnest in the 1970s, thousands of quakes have been cataloged there. Every few years, one is strong enough to rattle windows and make the local news for a day. Then everyone forgets again. The fault does not. So now we come to the modern question, the one the emergency planners work on. What happens if the 1811 sequence, or even one of those three great shocks, happens again today? Because in 1811, the region held a few thousand settlers in log cabins. Today, more than 10 million people live in the wider zone of serious shaking. Memphis, a metropolitan area of well over 1 million people, sits roughly 40 miles from the heart of the fault zone. St. Louis, millions more, sits near its northern reach. Nashville, Little Rock, Louisville, Evansville, all inside the reach of strong shaking. And this is where reason 2 stops being an abstract point about building codes and becomes physical. A large share of the older buildings in Memphis and St. Louis are unreinforced masonry, brick walls carrying their own weight, with nothing tying them together against sideways motion. Engineers are blunt about what strong shaking does to that kind of construction. The walls peel away from the floors, and the building comes down into the street. California spent decades finding these buildings and forcing retrofits. Hospitals rebuilt, schools strengthened, old brick storefronts reinforced with steel. An effort that cost billions and took generations. The Midwest started that work far later, and in many towns, it has barely started at all. Memphis has made real progress on its newest construction. Modern towers and hospitals there are designed with the fault in mind. But a city is not its newest buildings. A city is everything standing in it, including the century-old brick neighborhoods, the aging warehouses, the small-town main streets up and down the valley that no retrofit program has ever touched. The hospitals, the fire stations, the schools built before modern codes, they are all part of the same equation. Then there is the ground itself. Much of the Mississippi Valley is not rock at all. It is hundreds of feet of soft, water-soaked river sediment. In a major quake, that kind of ground does something almost supernatural. It liquefies. The soil loses its strength and behaves, for those violent seconds, like a thick fluid. Buildings tilt and sink. Buried tanks float upward out of the earth. Roads tear apart. We know it happens there because it already did. Those geysers of sand the settlers described in 1811 were massive liquefaction, and the scars of it are still visible from the air across the farmland of Missouri and Arkansas today. Now add reason 3, the arteries. Count what crosses the new Madrid zone, the Mississippi River bridges that carry the interstates, and note that for long stretches of the river, those crossings are few and far between. Lose 2 or 3 of them, and the detours stretch for hours. The rail corridors linking the eastern and western halves of the country. The barge traffic on the river itself, which moves an enormous share of American grain to the world. Grain that feeds not just this country, but dozens of others. And below the ground, some of the most important natural gas pipelines on the continent. Lines built decades ago, running north and east from the Gulf, directly across the fault zone, feeding heat and power to tens of millions of homes. Federal disaster planners have modeled a repeat of 1812, and their scenarios describe a multi-state emergency. Bridges out, pipelines broken, river commerce halted, hundreds of thousands of buildings damaged, millions of people affected across 8 states or more. One of the largest disaster response exercises ever conducted in the United States used exactly this scenario as its script. The planners are not doing that for entertainment. So how likely is it? Let us be honest with the numbers, because this channel does not do fake countdowns. Government scientists estimate the chance of a repeat of the great 1811 class earthquakes at somewhere around 7 to 10% in the next 50 years. The chance of a magnitude 6 or greater, strong enough to badly damage the unprepared brick of Memphis or St. Louis, they put it roughly 25 to 40% in the same window. Those are not tomorrow numbers, but they are not lottery numbers either. A 1 in 3 chance of a damaging quake within the lifetime of a mortgage, under cities that were largely not built for it. That is the real headline. And unlike a hurricane, it comes with no forecast, no watch, no warning. Think about how the Midwest experiences disaster. A tornado comes with a siren and a radar map. A flood comes with days of rising water. The people of this region are among the best in the world at responding to warnings, because their disasters have always announced themselves. An earthquake is the one disaster that never does. The first second of a New Madrid earthquake is the first second anyone will know it is happening. And for anyone watching from that region, the practical lesson of this entire video fits in one sentence. Know whether your home, your kid's school, and your workplace were built or retrofitted with earthquakes in mind. Because in this part of the country, that single question separates the buildings that ride it out from the ones that do not. There is one more wrinkle scientists debate, and it deserves mention because it cuts both ways. Some researchers have argued the fault may be slowly shutting down, that the deep motion feeding it has faded, and the modern quakes are just the long echo of 1811. Others push back hard, pointing to the geological record, which shows the New Madrid zone has produced great earthquake sequences repeatedly over the past few thousand years, around 1450, around 900, and before. A fault that has ruptured again and again on a timescale of centuries, they argue, has not retired. It is simply between performances. The honest answer is that science is still arguing, and while it argues, 200 small quakes a year keep ticking away under the valley. So, let me give you the 3 futures, the honest way to hold this. Future 1, the most likely in any given year. Nothing. The fault crackles. The towns above it hold their earthquake drills once a year, and daily life in Memphis and St. Louis goes on exactly as it did yesterday. Most years are this year. Future 2, the middle path, and over decades, a very real one, a magnitude 6, maybe a little more. Not a repeat of 1812, but enough. Enough to bring down old brick across a city that has never in living memory felt real shaking. Enough to crack a bridge. Enough to turn a forgotten fault into the only story in America for a month. Engineers in the region will tell you plainly, a moderate New Madrid quake would do damage out of all proportion to its size, because of where it happens and what stands above it. Future 3, the repeat, the full sequence. 3 great shocks over a winter, under the crossroads of the nation. The models exist, the response plans exist, and the geological record says it has happened there, not once, but as a pattern, every few centuries, for thousands of years. The last one was 2 centuries ago. Here is my honest opinion. After everything the research shows, California is not America's most dangerous earthquake zone because California knows it is an earthquake zone. It watches, it builds, it braces. The New Madrid zone is dangerous for the opposite reason, because it is invisible, because the people above it were never taught its name, because its power travels farther, its cities are softer, and its silence is longer than human memory. An earthquake fault is most dangerous, exactly when everyone above it has forgotten it exists. And for 200 years, America has been forgetting this one. So now I want to hear from you. Did you know about New Madrid before this video? And how close do you live to that zone? Memphis, St. Louis, Kentucky, Arkansas, Tennessee. Drop your state in the comments. I read every one, and I want to see how many of you have been living on top of this fault without ever being told. If this video taught you something the news never did, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. And subscribe with notifications on, because next, we cover the coastline in the Pacific Northwest that scientists say will drop 6 feet in a matter of minutes, an entire American shoreline falling into the sea while a wall of water races toward it. That fault has a schedule, and it is already late. The ground beneath America is speaking. Make sure you are listening.